And now it's my honor to welcome to our stage a Republican from Florida, a congressman who we've been talking backstage a lot, these big issues of what's possible in Washington, how to make progress across the aisle. From South Florida, Congressman Carlos Curbelo. Congressman, thank you. Welcome to Axios. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. So, as we were kibitzing backstage, you said that you had a formative experience involving sports that was the best possible preparation for being on Capitol Hill.
Refereeing high school basketball. And of course, the parents were always the worst. The kids were okay. But it built a lot of character. And it taught me that you always got to try to make the right call. You're going to get heckled from both sides. If you do a really good job, no one will say anything to you. You can just walk quietly out of the gym. That's kind of what politics is like. So, and I think one of the big problems is that the referees want the game to be all about them these days. And it's not about us. It should be about the American people like it's about the players. So, yeah, I learned a lot from refereeing high school basketball. I recommend it.
And some of those things that you said did sound familiar. Now, you're 37, so you're an official millennial.
Thank you.
It's all your fault.
Some people put me as a young Gen Xer, some as an old millennial. I'm kind of in between, like, you know, bipartisanship, I guess.
But you have been reaching out not only across the aisle, but also across generations. What is it like to be younger on Capitol Hill?
It's, I think it's, we bring a different perspective. I think we're a little more sober about politics. I find that people in my generation in both parties are less into some of the role playing that I think many in Washington have become accustomed to. So I tell young people all the time, and especially people younger than me, I really think that it's going to take new generations in the United States in order to have the political renaissance that I think we sorely, desperately need in this country, bring a more sober, thoughtful, conciliatory approach to politics.
Sober, thoughtful, conciliatory. That's sort of 3 strikes for the current Congress. Of those, what would be your, what would you be most hopeful about actually making a change?
So I think there's some issues out there that just cry out for obvious solutions. We've been debating immigration in this country. The first DREAM Act was filed in 2001. We're still talking about dreamers in 2017, having done nothing. Broader immigration reform was introduced by President Bush in 05, 06. Nothing has happened. And the solutions, at least to me, are fairly obvious. And one of the things I'm optimistic about this Congress, especially end of the year, is that we may have the first meaningful, significant immigration compromise since NACARA legislation in 1998.
So this would be extending the DACA protections, a dreamer fix. Speaker Ryan has said that that'll be part of the budget bill at the end of the year, right? Is that what you're...
That's our hope, and obviously that would be accompanied by some reasonable border security measures. I think most Americans agree that we have a right and a duty and a responsibility to control our border. There's a lot of drug activity at the border, and most Americans want to stop that. So now, when you start talking about a wall, I think that's where people start to get divided. But I don't think anyone actually believes we're going to build a 2,000-mile wall. But we should do everything we can to have reasonable, sensible border security.
Don't tell the president. What is your sense of how much what he says is for effect and how much of it he really thinks? For instance, with the wall, what do you think he actually either would settle for or recognizes he'll probably ultimately deliver?
I think, and I don't know him well, I've only interacted with him a couple times, but I think, and you look back at his life and his career in business, he's a very pragmatic person. I really think he will take almost any reasonable compromise. So I don't pay too much attention. I tell people I'm not obsessed with the president. There are people, both those that are for him and those that are against him, that are obsessed with him. Their day revolves around what the president says and does. I just can't do that. I don't think that's healthy about anyone. And by the way, I have a wife and kids. I think about them all day, but my whole day doesn't revolve around them either. You know, that's just not healthy. So I don't let myself be defined by this president, just like I didn't let myself be defined by the last president. Going back to refereeing, people ask me all the time, how do you deal with Donald Trump? I said, the same way I dealt with Barack Obama. When I agree with them, I'm supportive and I'll get behind their ideas. If I think their ideas are bad, then I'll oppose them. And I think that's what every member of Congress should do. This is not about, you know, if they're from my party, I have to agree every time. If they're not, I have to oppose them every time. This is about institutions and the balance of power. And I think that's our constitutional duty, to work with the executive when we think they're working on something worthwhile, and to oppose them when they're not.
Now, during our bipartisan breakfast, we were talking about the difference between what's practical as far as bipartisan action or just action, period, and what's aspirational. So could you talk about a little bit about how you see that difference between what you think we should shoot for and what you think is realistic?
Well, bipartisanship is not an end. It's a means to achieving a good, lasting policy. So I'm part of the Problem Solvers Caucus, and you'll have Josh Gottheimer here in a few minutes. And we work very closely together. But this dialogue that we're having, it's all wonderful. It's important because you can't have results without good relationships and sober conversations. But that's not the end. The end is to have good policy. And that's why we're hoping to play a role in an immigration compromise. Obviously, there has to be a spending compromise. That'll happen at the leadership level. Tax reform, there may be room, there should be room for bipartisanship there. So the idea is that, and I think our framers, obviously, given the way they developed the Constitution, the idea is for people to come together, have rigorous debate, and then settle on something where they can all agree, knowing that not everyone is going to get everything they want. So I think that once we have a couple major bipartisan wins, Congress can be conditioned into this kind of behavior, and we can kind of crowd out the forces that always try to prevent that type of compromise, either for political gain or for financial gain. A lot of out there that like to get people riled up, divide the country, and make a profit.
So who are you talking about when you say make a profit?
Well,
who's trying to divide the country for profit?
There are a lot of interest groups out there on both sides, and their business model is we're going to make a lot of people angry, paranoid, scared, and we're going to ask them for contributions. Send $10 today to help me stop X from destroying your life. And since there's a lot of anxiety and economic insecurity in our country, people are susceptible to that. And that's why I think, in my view, tax reform is one of the biggest things we can do for this country, because greater growth is going to make people feel better. It's going to make people more confident. They're going to be less prone to scapegoating fellow Americans or blaming trade deals for some of our challenges in this country. And people are just going to feel like they can thrive.
What are the chances of getting Democratic votes in the House for tax reform?
I think they're pretty good. You know, a lot of our Democratic colleagues are fixated on this, you know, the 1%, the top 1%, which I understand we want a fair tax system. But I also understand, and it's a statistical fact, that we have one of the most progressive tax systems in the world. The wealthy pay a lot to fund all of our government programs. So, again, I don't obsess with, you know, the 1% or the 2% or the 10%. I think we should have tax relief for all Americans. But Republicans are going to put in a fourth bracket. There's a good chance that it's the 39.6% bracket that exists today. And I think if we do that, that's going to help a lot of our Democratic colleagues consider supporting a tax reform package that lowers the tax burden on at least most Americans and leads to greater growth.
Now, you're a Republican in South Florida. Depending on the issue, that can be enemy. How have you navigated that?
By being a good referee. Look, people in my district, for example, on a lot of foreign policy issues are more conservative leaning. They believe in a hawkish, activist American foreign policy. On issues like education, strong supporters of public education. I came from the school board. I am too. So on every district, I really try to do what's best for my district. And that's why sometimes I'm in agreement with our leaders in the House on the Republican side, and sometimes I'm not.
And when you're not, do they get it or do they punish you?
No, yeah, people talk about it, and I think on the Democratic side, this might be more the case. But on the Republican side, there's almost not enough accountability. I think we have the opposite problem, where every member is really kind of expected to act as an independent contractor for their district. And that's caused us some challenges, right? Because we've struggled at times to get our majority to pass certain bills.
So that bespeaks weak leadership. Can you see your generation providing stronger leadership?
I think that our leadership is a product of our conference. I don't think our leaders are weak. I think our leaders lead a very diverse group of people who are very strong-minded about their ideas, some of who are not prone to compromise. So I do think that as younger members come in, and I see this in our conference, and I think in the Democratic caucus as well, it'll be easier for our leaders to be effective because, again, we just bring a different approach, attitude, tone, demeanor to the work.
Congressman, backstage, you tried the overnight oats. How were they?
They are very good. Very good.
So over overnight oats, talking about two factors that are most important in working across the aisle. I thought these were very fascinating. Congressman, you said your two factors were, first, you said personal discipline.
Yeah, you have to really fight the instinct to fall into the roles. I mean, everyone knows what the roles are here, right? If you're a Republican, you have to kind of ignore, for example, an issue like climate change. Now, I don't do that. Number one, because I understand the science. Number two, because I represent a district where most people live near sea level and near the sea.
Right.
So it's a local issue for us. But that's the key. Don't fall. It's easy. It's expected of you to fall into these buckets, into these roles, into these silos. And you really have to fight that. And on every issue say, well, what's the right thing to do? What makes sense? So, yes, it requires discipline in that sense where you have to fight the inertia that is so strong in our politics.
And Congressman, your second one, you have a counterintuitive take on risk-taking.
Yeah, so a lot of people, especially I think people who cover politics, view bipartisan conduct or compromise as something that's done by those who are seeking political cover or who are trying to play it safe. It is the opposite in most cases today in our country. Partisanship is what's expected of you. It's what's safe. It's what Republicans and Democrats do. Republican members of Congress support the Republican president. Democratic members of Congress oppose the Republican president. That's what you're expected to do. So I think to try to break that actually takes more effort. And I don't want to say people use the word courage. I don't think anything we do here on the Hill is courageous. People who are out fighting for our country, they're courageous. But it certainly takes effort. It takes introspection and self-reflection to break those habits and say, no, I'm actually going to work with someone who I'm told I'm not supposed to work with because it's the right thing to do and because I think we can come up with a good idea.
Now, Congressman, you're co-chair of the Congressional Future Caucus focused on millennials. What is the biggest hope that you have for millennials changing the tone, or are you doing some of your own things to make things worse up there?
Well, I really don't think we're doing anything to make things worse. I think millennials have to stop waiting our turn, and we have to start making demands of our leaders in the House on both sides. And by the way, there are a lot of wonderful millennial, younger Democrats who are challenging their leaders. We need to do the same, and we need to tell people, we want to do this differently. We want to help restore the trust and confidence in this government. We want people in our generation who, by the way, don't care for the government at all. Ask any millennial if they think Social Security or Medicare is going to be around for them. They'll laugh. They just don't trust our institutions. We want to make our generation believe, and in order to do that, we need to change how this government works or how it doesn't work. So that's the approach I bring to this work, and I encourage all millennials, don't sit back and complain. It's easy to tweet or to send a message over social media and then go back to doing whatever you were doing. Get involved. Get involved. Vote, but also communicate directly with your representatives and let them know that you want things to change for the better.
And Congressman, as we get the hook here, one of the perks of your job, you met Peyton Manning in person. What was that like?
That was my last sports idol. So growing up in Miami, I was a big Dan Marino fan. Dan Marino was, the end-all be-all when I was a kid. And then when he retired, I was still kind of young. And I really felt Dan Marino's retirement. And I saw Peyton Manning. I go, wow, that's like a new version of Dan Marino. So I adopted Peyton Manning. I went to a Peyton Manning game almost every year of his career. And I think he's just a stand-up guy. And hopefully, he'll run for office one day, because you look at the way that guy conducts himself and the way he always tries to bring people together, I think that's exactly what we need.
Congressman Carlos Curbelo, thank you for joining
us.
Thank
you, Mike.
Appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Congressman.